So, you want to take a trip to the Red Sea, do you? I assume that's why you're here with me. Well, let me ask you something. You ever been to the Red Sea? It's hot. Maybe you already made that trip. And if you have, then I got a question for you. Have you been down the Red Sea on an old C4 as a watchstander in the Black Gang, where there's no way to get cool other than standing underneath a blower vent blowing hot air? You think you have what it takes? Well, we're going to find out just what you're made of as we go on our third leg of this journey around the world in 70 days. I'm the Saipan Sailor. Welcome aboard. Port Said, Egypt. It's spelled like said, S-A-I-D. Now that's the port where we anchor and wait for our turn to go through the transit on the Mediterranean side. And I remember being there first time in 1976, and we were close enough to town so I could see the buildings. And I remember seeing a war-torn town. I mean, the buildings had huge shell holes in them, and you could pretty much see where the Israelis kind of cut a path through that town with their fighter jets. It was incredible sight. And there were actually sunken ships in that harbor too, with their bows sticking up. But that's where we would sit and wait for a transit. And when it was our turn to go, we would go. There was not a whole lot to see going through that canal. There's some buildings, interesting sights. I remember there was this giant AK-47 statue, you know. One interesting thing was that they would have tanks lined up on the shoreline with their guns pointed right at us, and they'd be following us the whole time. And if you were nervous about guns, then that may not have been a good sight to see. Now, another thing they used to do while we were transiting, I can't remember if they were doing it on the ships I was on, but they would throw concussion grenades in the water because they were afraid of there being enemy divers trying to plant bombs on the ship. At least that's the story I got. Honestly, I can't remember how long it would take to transit through that canal. Anywhere from 16 hours to a day. Surprising at my age, I can't remember anything. I've been through there so many times. But once we get to the other side, we start heading down the Red Sea. Now, I want to explain something, okay? The sea temperature would hover between 90 and 100 degrees. It would never deviate much from that. So if you're down below standing watch, especially on that old ship I was on, luckily I wasn't a watchstander on this story I'm telling you. You can't even touch the handrail, okay, without wearing gloves. It was that hot. The engine room would hover between 110, 120 degrees sometimes. Yeah, you needed a lot of air pressure blowing by you in order to dissipate some of that heat. It wasn't for everybody. Now, the chief electrician was this old fella named Warren who lived in Mobile, Alabama. And I would get a kick out of him because every day at 10 o'clock, which was coffee break for us, he would come out of his room with a coffee cup. He'd head right for the pantry and he would put ice in it, go right back to his room. Well, back in '78, nobody heard of iced coffee, you know, so he wasn't getting iced coffee. let's just say that he had his own medicine. So I took the hint real quick. And when we pulled into South Yemen, which was our next stop, a little town called Aden, A-D-E-N, I think. I went ashore and I came back with a bottle of Red Label, Johnny Walker Red. And I gave it to him. And I knew I had a friend for the rest of the trip. I was letting him know that, look, I'm your partner, not your enemy, you know. Aden was a very interesting place. I mean, it was separate from Yemen, kind of. Never really understood their government. I think it wasn't really part of the Saudi Arabian hierarchy. But I don't know. And I don't know what it is today. Who knows? But we left there the next day. I think we were there just to load up with fuel and maybe get some stores. Got out of the Red Sea, made a left turn and started heading east. Went across the Indian Ocean and we started headed for, our next stop was to discharge our cargo in Indonesia. We were to make 2 stops there in Indonesia. First Jakarta, and then Surabaya, which was the capital, a more developed town than Jakarta. When we got there, the chief electrician told me, he said, listen, he said, while they're working cargo, they're using winches and all that, okay, one of us has to be on duty all the time while they're working cargo. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to do 24-hour watches, okay? In case something goes wrong, one of us has to be here. So he said, you go ahead and go ashore, and I'll take the first watch. So, okay. A bunch of us went ashore. This place was basically a mud hole. You know, I mean, this is 1978. What do you expect? The world was a different place then than it is today. Very different. One of the guys in my department made a deal with the steward, and he acquired a ham, some canned food, and a few other things he had in like a gym bag, you know, or a little duffel bag, and a carton of cigarettes. So when we got to the gate where the guards were, they pointed to his gym bag, and he pulled out a carton of cigarettes and gave it to him. And they looked down on the cigarettes, looked at each other, took the cigarettes and turned their backs, which was a sign to us to get out of their sight. And so we did. And there they had these little rickshaws. It was just a little carriage where a guy would pull, you know. That was our transportation in the town. There wasn't much to do there other than chase women and get drunk. In fact, when it came to the women, there wasn't a whole lot of chasing to do either. So the next morning, I came back to ship, and from that point on, we rotated our watches. He would go ashore, and then I would go ashore. It worked out great. But one thing I noticed, we carry grain over there, okay, and the stevedores would get down in the cargo hold, and they had these 5-gallon pails that they would fill up with grain and then hoist it onto the pier. And that's how they were unloading the cargo. But after about a week, into about 10 days, the cargo holds were getting pretty low, and I noticed that to the bottom of the cargo hold, they started hitting sulfur. Apparently the sulfur was what they carried last, and they didn't discharge, they didn't unload all of it, and they didn't clean out the cargo hold. So now these stevedores were shoveling half sulfur and half grain. I mean, I don't know how they separated the two, but it was kind of sad to watch. What can we do? We left Jakarta, went to Surabaya, and that had more of a downtown area, a little more developed. Did the same thing. We were there about 10 days. And when we wrapped it up, discharged our cargo, we headed east again for Hawaii. Now I'll talk about the rest of the trip. I'll try to squeeze it in the next episode, but for now, I'm going to put this one to rest, and want to wish you all clear skies and calm seas. This is a Saipan Sailor, and this was part 3 of Around the World in 70 Days. Now I'll talk